All right, tell me all the different ways that we have solved quadratics. First of all, what does it mean to solve a quadratic? What does it mean when we're solving it? What are we finding? Where it crosses the x-axis, yes. These are all things that you are going to have to know for your test early next week. For those of you that have been asking when the test is. All right, so this week consists of, we're going to do the quadratic formula. Then we're going to do some real-world applications. Then we're going to start reviewing and doing multiple ways of doing this. So, first way that we did this was what? What was the first thing that we did to find where it crossed the x-axis? Well, then you need to start looking because I understand that it's Monday morning, but we're not just going to sit here. What was the first way that we found where it crossed the x-axis? Kind of. Well, we found the vertex, but that wasn't solving it, because solving it was finding where we did the x-axis. But what did we do? The first time we did it, we saw where it crossed the x-axis, and in order to see it, we had to do what with it? What? Yeah, we had to graph it. So the first way that we solved these was by graphing. Okay, then, and I'm going to tell you our first 3 ways of solving these were on a quiz that we took. So think about that last quiz that you took, and what were the 3 parts of it? The first part was graphing. What was the second part? What did you have to do to solve it on the second part? Take the... I'll give you a clue. It was written something like this. There was no middle term. Yeah, you had to take the square root. Okay, so finding them by taking square roots. Then what did we do? And this kind of went back to last chapter. You had to think back to last chapter in order to do it this way. Yeah, there we go. So then we factored it. Solved by factoring. Then the last 2 days of last week, Wednesday and Thursday, we spent 2 days doing what? What was that called? No, that's what we're doing today. You're going to have to know this stuff, guys. Yeah, we completed the square last week. So the 4th way was by completing the square, and today we are going to do our 5th and our last way, which is the quadratic formula. And this is probably the most popular way to solve these. Okay, because everything else that we did, there kind of has to be some special attributes to it. The quadratic formula is something that most teachers make their students memorize because this is something that you will continually use. Yes, sir? Yep. Yep. Okay, so the quadratic formula, and I know it's listed there, but I want you to write it out. Okay, because all the studies state that by writing something out, you remember it better, correct? All right, so the quadratic formula is the opposite of b plus or minus the square root, and the square root's got to be big because it's the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and that whole thing's got to go underneath the square root, the b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Well, yep, we're going to talk about it. Right now you're supposed to be writing it down. All right, so if we remember, okay, standard form of these guys, because I want you to skip a little bit and go to where are you? This guy, where it says discriminant. Bottom of page 74. So go to the bottom of page 74, please. Because before we do any of this, I want to talk about just the discriminant. And what the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. Okay? Now, when we were graphing these, when we were taking the square roots and all that good stuff, how many solutions can a quadratic have? It can have 2. What else can it have? 1. And it can have 0. All right. So, based off of the discriminant, just based off of the discriminant, we can tell how many solutions a quadratic has. Okay? If b squared minus 4ac, if it is positive, we are going to have 2 solutions. Okay. If b squared minus 4ac is 0, we are going to have 1 solution. Okay. And if it is negative, we are going to have no solution. And the reason why is because we end up taking the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Can you take the square root of a negative number? No. Therefore, we would get no solution. Yes, sir? No, if this whole thing, if b squared minus 4ac, because this is what the discriminant is. The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. When you figure out what this is, if that number is positive, it's 2 solutions. Okay? If it's 0, there's 1 solution. If it's negative, there is no solution. Okay? So, oh, there it is. All right, so let's look at this guy. First thing we always have to do is put it in, no, standard form. And standard form looks like what? Okay, so, but there's a certain, for quadratics, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Okay, so in this case, if we're going to get it into standard form, it's going to look like what? Minus 3x, and since that 5's coming over here, we have to go plus 5 equals 0. Okay, now that that is in standard form, what is a? 2, no, not 2x, just 2. B is negative 3. C is 5. All right, so now that we know what A, B, and C is, we can plug them in up here. Okay, so B is, so negative 3 squared minus 4 times, what is A? 2 times, what is C? 5. So, negative 3 squared? 9 minus 4 times 2 times 5? I'll take 40. So now it says 9 minus 40 gives us negative 31. So our discriminant is negative 31. How many solutions does this have? No solution. So our quadratic would have no solution because that is negative. Okay? So, let's do this guy. A is 1, B is, C is 4. Alright, so if we're going to do this, what's my B? So 4 squared minus 4 times, what's A? Times, what's C? So 4 squared is 16 minus 16 is 0. How many solutions are there? 1. Not yet. Okay, not yet, no. Maybe later today. Okay, we've got 2 class periods. Okay, right now we're concentrating on this. Okay, all right, so do this next one. Does everybody understand where we're plugging, why we're plugging in numbers where we are? This b squared minus 4ac. Okay, so do it. Do this next one. Dylan, what's my A? What's my A? What's my B? -2. You have to really be careful with that. Okay, and C is 3, because next hour when we do the whole quadratic formula, you really have to be careful with getting your B correct. Okay, so if I'm going to do this, what am I plugging in my first parenthesis? So -2 squared minus, what am I plugging in here? 4 times 1 times 3. So I have -2 squared minus is -8. So if I ask you, what is my discriminant, what would you say? -8. Yep. Looking for this number right here. Okay. How many solutions are there? 0 solutions or no solution. Okay. Do that next one. Arto, what'd you get to be your discriminant? Oh, but it's more than that. You got to do that whole thing, that negative 7 squared minus 4ac. Alyssa, what'd you get? 69? Innocent, what'd you get? Huh? 29? Adrian, what'd you get? Manning, what'd you get? Haley? You got 29, Cheyenne? What'd you guys get? Dylan? Alright, so let's look at it, because this is a very common mistake. So I'm hearing 29, I'm hearing 69. Okay? Very common that we would get those two answers. Okay? So let's look at this. We've got, what am I plugging in here? Negative 7 squared minus 4 times negative 5. So when I take negative 7 squared, I get 49 minus negative 20. So what happens when I have minus a negative? That's got to turn into a plus. So we're going to end up with 69. In that case, how many solutions am I going to get? 2 solutions. Okay, so be careful with that. If you end up with minus a negative, make sure that turns into an add, because that's a very common mistake that we use. Okay?